In other news, he was one of the authors of a key report submitted to President Emmanuel Macron last year, outlining how France could take the lead in the field of artificial intelligence. Philippe Aghion on Monday shared honors with Mokyr and Peter Howitt for the Nobel Economics Prize. His explanation of how creative destruction can drive economic growth is one of those cornerstones that people are talking about in this age of artificial intelligence. Siobhan Silk has more.
Why do humans live so much better now than our ancestors did? That's the main question tackled by the trio of academics who've been awarded the 2025 Nobel Prize in Economics for their work on how innovation drives growth. American-Israeli Joel Mokyr took half the prize for his long-term studies based on historical sources, while French economist Philippe Aghion shared the other half with Canadian Peter Howitt for their mathematical model quantifying creative destruction, the idea that innovations destroy older technologies and businesses, but in the long run generate stable growth and improve human welfare. It's particularly timely amid growing anxiety over the AI revolution and its potential to make many jobs obsolete.
With the understanding of the mechanisms of creative destruction provided by the laureates and the follow-up research, we have a better chance to make sure growth can continue and be guided in the direction that benefits humankind.
Reacting to their win, Howitt and Aghion warned against the protectionist policies of the current US administration, saying they could stifle innovation.
Anything that gets in the way of openness is an obstacle to growth. So I see there kind of dark clouds currently, accumulating.
The three laureates will each take a share of the €1 million prize. Philippe Aghion says he intends to invest his part in his research lab at the Collège de France and INSEAD Business School, helping to fund young researchers' work on AI and green growth.
He says he still doesn't like seeing himself on camera. Philippe Aghion, Nobel Economics laureate, is with us in our studios. Thanks for joining us here on France 20.
Very nice seeing you.
I heard on the radio the other morning, you giving an interview, where you said that the Nobel Committee actually asked you for the phone numbers of the other winners?
Absolutely.
Tell us what happened.
No, I mean, they were not sure because they tried, it was not working, so they wanted to double check probably. I think they had some numbers, but they wanted to double check. So they asked me to look for, I had the phone number of Peter Howitt, although not at hand, which is, and I didn't, and my assistant had the number of Joel Mokyr, but I could not tell my assistant what it was for, that I needed that number. So I had to call my assistant, ask her for the phone number of Joe Mokyr without telling her why the reason why I needed that number. And she didn't guess why. No.
Okay, so you don't like seeing yourself yet on TV, but you got to brace yourself, right? Because imagine the next time you're in the faculty lounge at the Collège de France, are people going to look at you and say, oh, it's Philippe, or are they going to say, oh, it's the Nobel Economics laureate? Remember that the famous philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre refused the Nobel Literature Prize because he didn't want to be known as the Nobel winner for the rest of his life all the time.
I think, I think you can. I'm very happy to have received Nobel because it rewards the whole line of research. I think it acknowledges, a whole new way of thinking about the growth process. There was what we used to call the neoclassical growth paradigm. It was the Solow model, the model of Robert Solow. He was a wonderful man, Robert Solow, but it's a model whereby growth is, driven by capital accumulation primarily. So that was the paradigm, and capital accumulates, you produce more GDP, more output, you can save more, and the savings turn into investment, into new increasing capital stock, and you keep growing this way. That was the Solow model, okay? Nothing to do with innovation. It was pure capital accumulation, output, savings, investment, capital accumulation. And in our paradigm, the key role is played by enterprises. You see, I mean, the core of our paradigm are the firms that innovate to find new products or to better products or more efficient way to produce. And that's what, drives productivity growth, is the innovation activities of firms.
So firms that innovate, is it firms that take big risks?
They take, of course, big risks because they need incentives.
You could try and fail.
Of course, and they may fail. So that's why you need to create a favorable business climate for them to be, to be willing to invest in innovation, which is very risky, rather than, invest in real estate or pension funds, or, when someone puts her own funds or own money into a risky undertaking, it's not the same as if you put, your private savings into, a bank account or whatever. So it's a world, our world is a world where all the time you have new talents become new startups, and the new startups come to challenge existing firms. You see what I mean? And so it's a model where you want to encourage firms to innovate because they will get innovation rents, but later on they may be tempted to use their rents to prevent subsequent innovations because they don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. So you see that there is this contradiction at the heart of the growth process. On the one hand, you need innovation rents to induce firms to innovate, but on the other hand, they are tempted to use their rents to prevent subsequent entry and subsequent innovation because themselves don't want to be subject to creative destruction. So how do you deal with this contradiction, you see?
And you must have had many years of, I guess I can only call it heartache, because 1992 is when you co-author this paper.
But in fact, we started to work on it 87.
Oh, 87.
We met
even earlier, before
we
even
worked
there was
on it. We did it in 87.
Nobody in those days had a cell phone or
it was no.
And so 1987 was the year of a big stock market correction. There was going to be financial crisis that followed, and yet you co-author with Peter Howitt this paper in 1992, and for years, decades afterwards, the jobs that people go to are not the entrepreneurial innovation jobs. They're things like working in the city of London for a big trading firm or for a bank.
It's true that whenever you have waves, when you have new technological waves, people tend to go too much into the financial sector. So we need finance, of course. You need venture capital, institutional investors to finance innovation. But sometimes what happens is that there is too much, attraction for finance at the expense of the real economy.
And so you now have this model. When you talk about innovations, you understand how some of our viewers might be a little bit intimidated, dare we say scared, this notion of, because people feel intimidated when they see new gizmos and
because they're afraid of losing their jobs, for example. And that's why it's so important, and that's why I advocate a lot a kind of Danish system of flexicurity. When you lose your job, you get 90% of your salary for 2 years. You are retrained, and the state helps you find a new job. I think it's very important, to make creative destruction socially acceptable, and to make sure that nobody is left out of the process. It's very important to have this kind of flexicurity system that they have in Denmark.
And
it's also very important to have a good education system, because at school you learn to learn. At school you learn to be adaptable. If you don't go to good schools, you don't know how to adapt. So I think the combination of good schools, of a very good education system for everybody, like in Finland, like in Korea, if you have a good education system combined with a good flexicurity system, then there will be less reluctance to the creative destruction, you see, which is the driver of growth. Growth is really, economies that are dynamic are those economies where all the time you have new talents, new firms that come in, grow, and challenge existing firms. And existing firms, if they want to survive, they need to innovate again. Or if they don't, well, they have to, they are driven out of the market. You see what I mean? And that's what drives growth. But then first you need new talents. Where do the new talents come from? From schooling. So if you don't have good schools, you have very few new talents.
Excuse me, Philippe Aghion, you're French, right? And in France, the schooling is very top-down. You probably endured, like I did, sitting on the benches of big amphitheaters where the professors, who were then called mandarins sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not a
no, but there are two things.
Here
you talk about universities. I talk about primary, secondary schools.
Right.
We need primary, secondary schools that deliver good test scores. You see, good PISA tests. So I'm very much at school in favor of going back to calculus, reading, dictations. It's very important that high school students really master the basic knowledge. You see, I think that's very important. And then on top of that, you can study history, geography. But calculus, reading, basic literature, they need manuals, they need books. Don't use books, read paper books. And I think that's very important. And we used to have a school like that in France, and we lost it.
We've lost it.
We lost, the school. We have very good teachers. We have a really devoted, fully dedicated teachers in high schools in France, in primary and secondary school. But the system is organized in such a way that the public school system in France no longer delivers the promise of opportunity for everybody.
And why is that? Why is that? Is it because, the decision is that the private sector is good and we shouldn't be putting our money?
No. I mean, it's good to have the private sector, but I think, we had migrations, we had new ways of migration. We needed classes with, 15 students at most. We had excessively numerous class,
so lack of funding
and so
for education.
Then if there were students left behind, the teacher doesn't have time to care about them. So we need schools where there is nobody left behind. When anybody is left behind, she or he can have tutorship, can be helped, can the homework done at school. All this we didn't have, you see. We need to invest in schools so that we can really make sure that nobody is left out. The problem with the French schooling system is there are a lot of waste, a lot of children who get out of it barely knowing how to read and write. And that's not right. That's not good.
So there may be,
it
should be maybe cold comfort, but you compare the United States to Europe and you say the US does poorly on inequality and the social safety net that you're describing there, and Europe does poorly on innovation.
Exactly. That's right.
And so is this trend going to continue?
Well, I hope not. There is a Draghi report. Mario Draghi recommends that we wake up and we try to revert trend. I mean, the European per capita GDP is declining compared to the US per capita GDP. We need to get our acts together and become a frontier innovator space. So we need a single market, a truly single market, for goods and services, which we don't have. You have too many gold plating. Each country, each member state in Europe has its own regulation on top of the European regulation. We need a good financial ecosystem of innovation, venture capital, institutional investors. We don't have like in the US. And we don't have the equivalent of the DARPA, Defense Advanced Project Agency, this very pro-competition way of doing industrial policy. You have that in the US, you don't have that in Europe. So I think on all those dimensions, we can improve a lot in Europe to become more innovative. And on top of that, I would add the education and the flex security to make sure that, the creative destruction that we generate is socially acceptable. But that's where Europe needs to wake up.
All right. The creative destruction, that term sounds a little bit like when Mark Zuckerberg talked about move fast and break things to people.
Yeah, but break things in a way which does not endanger social safety. We need social safety nets. You see, we want to make sure that people feel comfortable with it.
Right now,
like in Denmark, there is no negative effect on health of losing your job. There's been studies on that by my friend Alexandra Roulet. No negative effect on health in Denmark of losing your job. In US, you have the death of despair phenomenon, which Anne Case and Angus Deaton have pinpointed so well. So that's the big difference, is that we need, on top of the Draghi recommendation, we need to have good education system and good flex security system to really make sure we don't run into populism. You see, why do you have Trump or Mrs. Le Pen on the doorsteps of the Élysée and Matignon? Because there were many people in France or in our countries left out of the process. You see, abandoned, that felt abandoned. Nobody should be left abandoned, should be left out of this quest for more innovation and more innovation-based growth.
More innovation. One final question, Philippe Aghion. We're talking about artificial intelligence now, and you've argued that it can be a factor for that innovation.
Absolutely, it's a big driver.
This interview, if it's a transcript of it, AI will eat it, will digest it, and for some, that's not innovation, that's theft. And so they're taking people's...
I know, that's right. But there is a good and bad use. But the good use of AI...
Taking people's content, their copyright...
Of course. That's why you need regulations. But you don't need more regulations. But too many regulations can get in the way of competition. So you need the right regulation. But avoid over-regulating, because when you have too many regulations, incumbent firms know how to cope with them. New entrants don't. So you want to make sure you have the right regulations, but not too many regulations, because then it stifles competition. And we know that the big problem with IT is that IT boosted growth initially, but then you had a growth decline because you had the emergence of superstar firms that discouraged new entry. You see, and because competition policy was not adequate, we let those firms grow unboundedly through merger and acquisition, and now we have to be very careful. Competition policy has to be there to make sure that the AI revolution will not end up having 2 or 3 dominant firms that will deter any innovation by anybody else. You see, it's always this thing. I need to have always newcomers. I don't want some kings, a few superstars, to just discourage all potential new entrants. And that's where competition policy is so important. Competition, education, flex security, those are pillars of a successful growth through creative disruption.
And we look forward to hearing your speech in Stockholm on December the 10th. Congratulations again,
Philippe
Aghion, on your Nobel Economics Prize.
Thank you so much.